Hello everyone, welcome to the episode 88 of SoLeadSaturday. The guest we have today, Carol Orange, has worked in the art world for more than 20 years. She began as a research editor on art books in London and later became an art dealer in Boston. She has an MBA from Simmons University and worked as a marketing manager at the Polaroid Corporation, along with concert pianist Virginia Eskin, who played Chopin's music. She read excerpts from George Sand's novels in 3 salons at the French Library in Boston. Her short story, Delicious Dates, was included in Warren Alder's 2010 short story anthology. Another story, Close Call, appeared in the Atherton Review, Volume 02, a recent article, Seven Great Haste Novels Recommended by an Art Dealer, was published in Crime Reads. Her debut novel, A Discerning Eye, takes off from the world's largest unsolved art theft at Boston's Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. The novel was published by Cavan Bridge Press on October 13, 2020. An audiobook is narrated by actors Campbell Scott and Kathleen McElfresh. Her author website is www.carolorange.com. So please do visit and learn more about her. And I can't wait to listen more from her. So let's just welcome her and hear more about her career journey. How did she find her area of interest and managing to lead that? Hey, hi Carol. Very happy to have you on the show and really appreciate all your time and consideration being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Leisha, for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's my honor as well. So to begin with, we have like a general segment about passion or the interest. So how did you find your interest in this particular field and what motivates you to be there where you are today?
Okay, well, I was an undergraduate at Cornell University, and I majored in both English literature and art history. So that was the beginning of my passion with both writing and also art history. After I graduated from Cornell, I was very fortunate to have this wonderful job in London on art books. I was a research editor of a book on Spanish art, and my advisor was named Senor Xavier de Salas. He was at the consulate, the Spanish consulate in London, and he later became the director of the Prado Museum. So I was so lucky to work with Xavier de Salas because he just made me even more passionate about art. I learned so much from him.
Yep. So that makes sense as well, right? Sometimes you find some teacher or the mentor along the side who can help you and make you more passionate about the field. So interest starts with kind of a mentors or the teachers you come across. And that is a very valid point. And thank you so much for sharing that. Moving towards our next segment, which is moreover about questions from the audience. And we have a couple of questions shortlisted for you. The first question that we have is, what are common traps for aspiring writers?
What art?
Common traps for aspiring writers.
Oh, yes, advice. Oh, for aspiring writers. Oh, my goodness, yes. I have lots of advice. I think the most important thing is to try to get good critical feedback. And that means not from a relative, that means from experts. And it's really hard to get good critical feedback, but it's so important because without it, you're really lost in the dark. I read this wonderful piece by Rick Moody on revision, and I think writing is revision, revision, revision. But what do you revise? You have to get into that feedback loop. So that's definitely one tip for aspiring writers.
Mhm.
The other is to be patient. Writing a novel takes a really long time. And very often, when I went back to some earlier versions of chapters, I could see some of the mistakes that I made. So, it's both getting external feedback, but developing that internal editor requires patience.
Mhm.
And I think another tip for aspiring writers is to be a part of a community of writers.
Mhm.
I've been in the same writing group in New York Society Library now for 7 years.
Mhm.
And to have the support as well as the good critical feedback
Mhm.
from my fellow writers is just so important. I mean, support is, you can, there are some days when the writing works for you, and there are other days when you're banging your head against the wall. So having this community of writers to help you through some of the darker times is really important, but also to get their praise when you get it right. It's so
Mhm.
reinforcing.
Yep, yep. And it is a lot more creative field as well. So it's, as you mentioned, right? Some days are good and some days are bad. So yeah, definitely need that kind of a community support around you. So thank you so
Right.
much for sharing. And those are really very important three tips that you shared with aspiring writers, and hope that answers the audience questions as well. One more question that we have is, how did you come up with Portia Malatesa's decision to analyze the stolen art of or art for underlying themes?
Oh, okay. So, Portia Malatesta. I've always admired Italians. I'm not Italian myself, but I'm an honorary Italian.
Wow.
And, and I have lots of Italian friends.
Uh-huh.
So she is an Italian American art dealer. And, everything, she was devastated by the robbery at the Gardner Museum. And she was a docent there as well as being an art dealer. And it's also where she used to go with her younger brother, Antonio,
Uh-huh.
to look at especially Vermeer's concert.
Uh-huh.
So it would make sense that an art dealer would look at the art that's been stolen and analyze the art. Unfortunately, the FBI never did that. They never looked at why the 13 wonderful art objects that were stolen were the ones when there's, like 200 works of outstanding art at the Isabella Gardner Museum.
Uh-huh.
In fact, Isabella was initially taught about Italian Renaissance art by Bernard Berenson, who was the leading expert at the time. So the Italian Renaissance paintings at the Gardner Museum are amazing. They're breathtaking. Titian's Rape of Europa, Botticelli, all the famous Italian Renaissance masters, and they were not touched.
Mhm.
So, Portia looks at the Vermeers, the Rembrandts, the Degas, and the Manet and analyzes the underlying theme in all of the paintings and it would only be an art historian who would think about doing this. And she comes up with a psychological profile of the thief based on the underlying theme of all of these wonderful works of art. And the underlying theme is the tension between dark and light, what the Italians call chiaroscuro. But in fact, all of them have that. And so it's like, why did the mastermind who organized the theft choose these particular paintings to steal when there were even more valuable pieces in the Italian rooms?
Yep. That's really very insightful, actually, and thank you so much for sharing. As a, it is hard actually to praise everything that you write, but you were quite good at actually explaining as well. So thank you so much. Uh, Next segment that we have is more or like a fun segment or the relaxation segment, where I'm going to give you like a three keywords which are more or associated with your profile or the career, and you have to just tell me whatever comes to your mind when you hear those words. It can be a replacement keyword, it can be an abstract definition, or after hearing all those three, if you want to sum up with something more creative, you can do that as well. So we are welcome to hear more from you on your profile. So are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So the first keyword that we have is author.
Author. Okay, the first author that comes to mind is Kate Atkinson. She's a British author. She writes mysteries, but they're really wonderful. You get to know her characters really well. Her first novel, behind the scenes of the museum, of course, appealed to me since I'm crazy about art. But she is just a fabulous author, and I really admire her a lot.
That's great. And the second keyword that we have is artist.
The artist that immediately comes to mind is Picasso, and it's not just that Pablo Picasso is almost a household word. I mean, he's very famous.
Mhm.
But I've been to the Picasso Museum in Paris, and what is extraordinary about Picasso, he led a long life. He lived till his 90s, and he just never stopped reinventing himself. He wasn't always an abstract artist, an abstract painter. He
Mhm.
started out doing representational painting. Then he became abstract. Then he worked in collage. And, he didn't just do paintings, he worked in collage. He also is a sculptor. And then he also does these just amazingly beautiful pottery. He had a place in the south of France where he did pottery. So he was always reinventing himself in terms of his art.
Mhm.
And you can see at the Picasso Museum in Paris some of his influences. He was influenced a lot by African art
Mhm.
that you can see in his famous paintings in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So Picasso, I mean, he's the quintessential artist, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And the third word that we have is editor.
Editor. Okay. Well, I think about Maxwell Perkins,
Mhm.
who was the editor of Hemingway and also F. Scott Fitzgerald, as well as Thomas Wolfe.
Mhm.
I think maybe Thomas Wolfe never would have been a well known American writer. His most famous book, You Can't Go Home Again, if it hadn't been for Maxwell Perkins, because it was Thomas Wolfe sent in this unwieldy, like thousand-page manuscript, and Maxwell Perkins helped him put it together, helped him delete what was redundant. He helped him organize it. And, so there's this masterpiece by Thomas Wolfe called You Can't Go Home Again. But if it hadn't been for the editor, Maxwell Perkins, who was a line by line editor, as well as a developmental editor, it never would have happened. And it does make you wonder about, I know more about what he did for Thomas Wolfe than for his work with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. So there are not many editors left who actually do line by line editing.
Wow.
Probably another one is Nan Talese.
Uh-huh.
And she edited Pat Conroy. And I've actually heard Pat Conroy speak about her. And he speaks glowingly because he says that it's the collaboration between himself as a writer and the editor, Nan Talese, that helped him write really magnificent novels like The Prince of that, which is one of my favorite novels.
That's great actually. And the way you came up with like a names of the people when you think about those keywords, it is something that shows your passion as well. Because whenever you are passionate about something, you admire others' work a lot and you are always getting inspired. You are always getting inspired by their work as well, along with following your passions. So thank you so much for sharing, and it was quite a fun to listen as well as getting to know more of people who are doing great in that space as well. So thank you so much. And moving towards our next segment is more about little more exploring your career work or volunteering. And we have one question under that segment. So you have represented many artists. Who are your favorites, and or any particular artwork that you always look forward to see?
Yes, thank you for that question, Leisha. It's a question I love to answer. My favorite artists are Velázquez, who I learned so much about when I was the research editor on the Book of Spanish Art. I didn't realize how extraordinarily creative he was and daring, especially for his time. He was a court painter, and the Spanish court, of course, only wanted flattering imagery of themselves. But his masterpiece, Las Meninas, which translate into the Maids of Honor, is at the Prado Museum, and you can study that painting and learn all about the court. There is the Infanta Maria Teresa, who's a little girl, all dressed up, and she's surrounded by her maids of honor. There's also a dwarf in the painting, and there's also a mastiff, a dog, and a naughty little boy with his foot on the mastiff, showing, the humor that Velázquez had. And then her parents are in the background, way, way in the back. And so you have this three-dimensionality in this portrait of the Infanta Maria Teresa and her court. Her parents are in the back, and then Velázquez put himself in the painting, showing, himself with his easel and his paintbrush. And, you could spend a long time analyzing all that's going on for this poor little girl who was, going to become a queen someday. So Velázquez is definitely one of my favorite painters. I love John Singer Sargent,
Mhm.
and so did Isabella Stewart Gardner.
Uh-huh.
And that's another artist who, thank goodness, was not touched by the thieves. The painting of in the courtyard at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum by Sargent is of, ironically, the Spanish flamenco. It's called El Jaleo, and it is just simply magnificent. You look at it and you can hear the music of the flamenco dancers, and it's really beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah.
He also did a portrait of Isabella,
Uh-huh.
as well as the infamous Madame X, which is in the Metropolitan Museum. And
Mhm.
the portrait of Isabella, she's wearing um, a strapless dress. No, it has little things going up here just to hold it up. But at the time that he painted this, because she had bare arms, and it was from her chest up, it was considered racy at the time. So her husband, Isabella's husband, Jack Gardner, wouldn't let her show it. At, but it is now in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And, I think again, Sargent is really a portrait painter, but he dared to show people as they really are.
Mhm.
And then I love Vermeer. That is the painting that was stolen that really breaks my heart, because there are only 36 Vermeers in the world. And Isabella bought that painting in Paris in 1906 at a time when Vermeer was not very well known. But she, on her own, without the help of Bernard Berenson, decided she really wanted this painting. It was at an auction house in Paris.
Okay.
So Vermeer's The Concert is also a very mysterious painting, because there are three people in it, and the lute player, we only see his back. And the two women, there's a woman at the harpsichord on the left and a woman on the right who is either singing or leading this, trio of musicians. But because we don't see the face
Mhm.
of the lute player, we are drawn more intimately into this painting. And Vermeer actually was a genius, because, as one of his biographers has said, this is not my idea, it was someone else's, but I think it's so incredible. He really hardly left his hometown of Delft.
Uh-huh.
He mainly painted in his own home. He did not go to Italy like many artists in
Mhm.
the 17th century. And yet he created these intimate scenes that are just so mysterious and exquisitely done. He was a master of light, and
Mhm.
this goes into the theme that Portia analyzed. So the light comes in from an unseen window, and it falls on the floor, and it also is on the folds of the woman at the harpsichord, her dress. And so you have this tension of the light and the dark in just about all the Vermeers in the world. And as I said, there are very few, there are only 36. So his work is, no one has ever painted the way Vermeer has. It's such a distinct style. And It's magnificent.
Yes, yes. And definitely, I can see that, coming from you is something that because you are in the art and the writing as well. So that is truly like, something that people can look forward to hear more because it is more insightful when you hear from the artist about the other artist. So thank you so much for sharing. And we have one more segment, which is more about tips or advice. And you can support your answer with books or courses here. So as you are an artist as well as the fiction writer, so what kind of advice or the tip you would like to give to the students or the professionals who are looking to get into this field or looking this as their long-term career option?
Oh, okay. So, all right. You're asking me about how I used my expertise as an editor of art books.
Yep,
Is
yep.
that yes?
How you can, how what kind of advice you can give to the students, like who wants to get into this field, like uh,
Well, I think in the art world, it's all about curation. And so, when I was a research editor, we didn't put up in the book every single painting or drawing that the artists had done. We had to curate and be selective about what you put in. And so learning, how to be a curator in terms of the art books. And I also did that when I had my own gallery in Boston. I would curate. I would be selective about which paintings of artists to show
mhm,
and which paintings not to show. So the same thing is true in writing because I did a lot of research for this novel, and I certainly didn't include the research in the novel, but it gave me the ability
mhm,
to write about something, to select, to curate what I had researched, and select certain um, ideas that I could put in the book. For example, one of the suspects uh, for the tragedy at the Gardner, the theft, was a mafia guy in Boston named Whitey Bulger. And he's unfortunately not alive anymore.
mhm,
But I had done a lot of research on him. Why was Whitey Bulger running one of the mafias in Boston when his brother
mhm,
became the president of the university? Ray Bulger, he became the president of the University of Massachusetts. And so here are two brothers, and one is super successful in, in a certain, in an acceptable life, and one is super successful in, an underground world. And, why was there such a big difference? I wondered. And also, Whitey Bulger, was an informant for
mhm,
the FBI. And the FBI would not have chosen him as an informant
mhm,
because he helped them deal with this really scary, horrible cocaine trade in Boston that was mafia run. And, they're very careful who they pick as an informant. And if he had been the person who was behind the robbery,
mhm,
the FBI would never have risked
mhm.
making him an informant. So I didn't put that whole story in my book because it wasn't really, relevant to the plot. But knowing all of that, going in depth in terms of that research, I selected just a small sentence or two about Whitey Bulger, because he is, or he was certainly well known.
Yep, yep. Thank you so much for sharing, and hopefully that helps the students as well if they're trying to take this career path. Moving towards our closure segment, which is more about the leadership and the way you are talking, it totally shows your passion towards your area of interest. So, what is your leadership style and any specific leader that you always follow or admire and why?
Oh, thank you for that question, Leisha. That is, I love that question because I did work before I had my own gallery. I did work in for corporations. I have an MBA and I did study
Yeah.
leadership as well as see it. So the leadership style that I like is facilitative, where it's getting information from the ground up and, not from the top down, not an authoritative kind of leadership style. I worked for the Polaroid Corporation and also for a big computer company in Massachusetts,
Mm-hmm.
digital equipment. And Ken Olson, who was the CEO of Digital, was very facilitative. In fact, he made sure that all the managers from beginning at age like 28, if there were some really young, talented managers to more seasoned executives, everyone had to take a course in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he was facilitative by example. And I could see that's why there was such incredible company loyalty. And that's why in their heyday, they became the number two computer company. What he didn't succeed at is he didn't foresee the Apple and Dell computer and the PCs and the personal computers. He didn't see that it would be that computing would end up being in on your laptop so that you and I could talk today. So I do think facilitative leaders. I admire Gandhi enormously. I admire Martin Luther King. I think these are the great leaders who have really made extraordinary changes in society, not just corporations. And I also admire, just to have a woman in there, because I was thinking about, you know, which woman I admire as the leader, and I would have to say it's Gloria Steinem,
Mm-hmm.
because she was at the forefront of the women's movement when it was kind of a quiet movement.
Mm-hmm.
And, she developed Ms. Magazine, and she also became a speaker. But she's the kind of leader who reached out to people. She was very facilitative, and she reached out to people to get their ideas, their input. It was from the ground up. So those are the people I admire most.
Wow, really very good names actually. So thank you so much for sharing and sharing your leadership style as well. What kind of leadership book this was fall under. So thank you, and it was really very pleasure and honor for me to listen to you actually and learn more about this creative field and how much hard work is involved into it. So thank you so much for being the guest for Solid Saturday.
My pleasure, Leisha. I really appreciate this opportunity. And thank you for having me on Lead Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye.
All right. So this is all about Carol and the way she's managing to lead her area of expertise. Before we close our today's episode, we have a closure quote from D.L. Sayers, which says, "The vital power of an imaginative work demands a diversity within its unity. And the stronger the diversity, the more massive the unity." So, on that quote, we are closing today's episode. See you guys in the next episode. Until we meet, happy leading. Let's lead together. Stay safe. Bye for now.